We're on part 2 of The Seventh Man. We're on page 140, paragraph 41. Let's continue where we left off. Remember, Kay's body was swept away by the wave, and the seventh man also got pummeled by the wave, and he ended up sick for a week, but now he is recovering. And we get to see how this affected him to have his friend die during the typhoon. As great a blow as this had been for them, though, Kay's parents never chided me for having taken their son down to the shore in the midst of a typhoon. They knew how I had always loved and protected Kay, as if he had been my own little brother. My parents, too, made a point of never mentioning the incident in my presence, but I knew the truth. I knew that I could have saved Kay if I had tried. I probably could have run over and dragged him out of the reach of the wave. It would have been close, but as I went over the timing of the events in memory, it always seemed to me that I could have made it. As I said before, though, overcome with fear, I abandoned him there and saved only myself. It pained me all the more that Kay's parents failed to blame me, and that everyone else was so careful never to say anything to me about what had happened. It took me a long time to recover from the emotional shock. I stayed away from school for weeks. I hardly ate a thing and spent each day in bed staring at the ceiling. So he is now beating himself over the fact he feels like he could have done something to save Kay. And it makes him worse. It makes it worse that no one says anything to him. No one will talk to him about what happened, and no one will discuss with him about what happened. So just ignoring it and suppressing it is not helping the seventh man. So the seventh man has guilt for not saving Kay, but no one will talk to him about it. So because no one will talk to him about it, he just kind of assumes the worst. He assumes that Kay's parents blame him, that his parents blame him, and worse, the seventh man blames himself for Kay's death. I hardly ate a thing and spent each day in bed staring at the ceiling. Kay was always there, lying in the wave tip, grinning at me, his hand outstretched, beckoning. I couldn't get that picture out of my mind. And when I managed to sleep, it was there in my dreams, except that in my dreams, Kay would hop out of his capsule in the wave and grab my wrist to drag me back inside with him. And then there was another dream I had. I'm swimming in the ocean. It's a beautiful summer afternoon, and I'm doing an easy breaststroke far from shore. The sun is beating down on my back, and the water feels good. Then, all of a sudden, someone grabs my right leg. I feel an ice-cold grip on my ankle. It's strong, too strong to shake off. I'm being dragged down under the surface. I see Kay's face there. He has the same huge grin, split from ear to ear, his eyes locked on mine. I try to scream, but my voice will not come. I swallow water and my lungs start to fill. I wake up in the darkness, screaming, breathless, drenched in sweat. So he has nightmares. At the end of the year, I pleaded with my parents to let me move to another town. I couldn't go on living in sight of the beach where Kay had been swept away, and my nightmares wouldn't stop. If I didn't get out of there, I'd go crazy. My parents understood and made arrangements for me to live elsewhere. I moved to Nagano province in January to live with my father's family in a mountain village near Komoro. I finished elementary school in Nagano and stayed on through junior high and senior high school there. I never went home, even for holidays. My parents came to visit me now and then. So he had to leave the town where Kay had been swept away because he had so many nightmares and he couldn't shake the nightmares. I live in Nagano to this day. I'm going to sneeze, sorry. I graduated from a college of engineering in the city of Nagano and went to work for a precision toolmaker in the area. I still work for them. Oh, I'm going to sneeze again, I'm pretty sure. I live like anybody else. As you can see, there's nothing unusual about me. I'm not very sociable, but I have a few friends I go mountain climbing with. Once I got away from my hometown, I stopped having nightmares all the time. They remained a part of my life, though. They would come to me now and then, like debt collectors at the door. It happened when I was on the verge of forgetting. It happened whenever I was on the verge of forgetting, and it was always the same dream, down to the smallest detail. I would wake up screaming, my sheets soaked with sweat. I like this quote. It happened whenever I was on the verge of forgetting. So it's like he constantly punished himself for the guilt of that event. That is probably why I never married. I didn't want to wake someone sleeping next to me with my screams in the middle of the night. I've been in love with several women over the years, but I never spent a night with any of them. The terror was in my bones. It was something I could never share with another person. I stayed away from my hometown for over 40 years. I never went near that seashore or any other. I was afraid that if I did, my dream might happen in reality. I had always enjoyed swimming, but after that day, I never went to swim in a pool. I wouldn't go near deep rivers or lakes. I avoided boats and wouldn't take a plane to go abroad. Despite all these precautions, I couldn't get rid of the image of myself drowning. Like Kay's cold hand, this dark premonition caught hold of my mind and refused to let go. So he tried to ignore and tried to suppress his feelings. He tried to ignore and suppress his feelings. Oops. But it didn't help. Then last spring, I finally revisited the beach where Kay had been taken by the wave. My father had died of cancer the year before, and my brother had sold the old house. In going through the storage shed, he had found a cardboard carton crammed with childhood things of mine, which he sent to me in Nagano. Most of it was useless junk, but there was one bundle of pictures that Kay had painted and given to me. My parents had probably put them away for me as a keepsake of Kay. But the pictures did nothing but reawaken the old terror. They made me feel as if Kay's spirit would spring back to life from them, and so I quickly returned them to their paper wrapping, intending to throw them away. I couldn't make myself do it, though. After several days of indecision, I opened the bundle again and forced myself to take a long, hard look at Kay's watercolors. Most of them were landscapes, pictures of the familiar stretch of ocean and sand beach and pine woods and the town, and all done with that special clarity and coloration I knew so well from Kay's hand. They were still amazingly vivid despite the years, and had been executed with even greater skill than I recalled. As I leafed through the bundle, I found myself steeped in warm memories. The deep feelings of the boy Kay were there in his picture. The way his eyes were opened on the world. The things we did together, the places we went together began to come back to me with great intensity. And I realized that his eyes were my eyes, and that I myself had looked upon the world back then with the same lively, unclouded vision as the boy who had walked by my side. I made a habit after that of studying one of Kay's pictures at my desk each day when I got home from work. I could sit there for hours with one painting. In each, I found another of those soft landscapes of childhood that I had shut out of my memory for so long. I had a sense whenever I looked at one of Kay's works that something was permeating my very flesh. Perhaps a week had gone by like this when the thought suddenly struck me one evening. I might have been making a terrible mistake all those years. As he lay there on the tip of the wave, surely Kay had not been looking at me with hatred or resentment. He had not been trying to take me away with him. In that terrible grin he had fixed me with, that too could have been an accident of angle or light and shadow, not a conscious act on Kay's part. He had probably already lost consciousness, or perhaps he had been giving me a gentle smile of eternal parting. The tense look of hatred I thought I saw on his face had been nothing but a reflection of the profound terror that had taken control of me for the moment. The more I studied Kay's watercolor that evening, the greater the conviction with which I began to believe these new thoughts of mine. For no matter how long I continued to look at the picture, I could find nothing in it but a boy's gentle, innocent spirit. So let's look back up at paragraph 53, where he says, I might have been making a terrible mistake all those years. Surely Kay had not been looking at me with hatred or resentment or wanting to take him away with him. So the seventh man comes to a realization. So what's that realization? What do you think it is? What does he realize? Let's keep reading. Paragraph 55. I went on sitting at my desk for a very long time. There was nothing else I could do. The sun went down and the pale darkness of evening began to envelop the room. Then came the deep silence of night, which seemed to go on forever. At last the scales tipped and dark gave way to dawn. The new day's sun tinged the sky with pink. It was then I knew I must go back. I threw a few things in a bag, called the company to say I would not be in, and boarded a train for my old hometown. I did not find the same quiet little seaside town that I remembered. Then an industrial city had sprung up nearby during the rapid development of the 60s, bringing great changes to the landscape. The one little gift shop by the station had grown into a mall, and the town's only movie theater had been turned into a supermarket. My house was no longer there. It had been demolished some months before, leaving only a scrape on the earth. The trees in the yard had all been cut down, and patches of weeds dotted the black stretch of ground. Kay's old house had disappeared as well, having been replaced by a concrete parking lot full of commuters' cars and vans. Not that I was overcome by sentiment. The town had ceased to be mine long before. I walked down to the shore and climbed the steps of the breakwater. On the other side, as always, the ocean stretched off into the distance, unobstructed, huge, the horizon a single straight line. The shoreline, too, looked the same as if it had before. The long beach, the lapping waves, people strolling at the water's edge. The time was after 4 o'clock. The soft sun of late afternoon embraced everything below as it began its long, almost meditative descent to the west. I lowered my bag to the sand and sat down next to it in silent appreciation of the gentle seascape. Looking at this scene, it was impossible to imagine that a great typhoon had once raged here, that a massive wave had swallowed my best friend in all the world. There was almost no one left now, surely, who remembered those terrible events. It began to seem as if the whole thing were an illusion that I had dreamed up in vivid detail. And then I realized that the deep darkness inside me had vanished, suddenly as it had come. I raised myself from the sand and, without bothering to take off my shoes or roll up my cuffs, walked into the surf to let the waves lap at my ankles. I realized that the deep darkness inside me had vanished. Almost in reconciliation, it seemed, the same waves that had washed up on the beach when I was a boy were now fondly washing my feet, soaking black my shoes and pant cuffs. There would be one slow-moving wave, then a long pause, then another wave would come and go. The people passing by gave me odd looks, but I didn't care. I looked up at the sky. A few gray cotton chunks of cloud hung there, motionless. They seemed to be there for me, though. I'm not sure why I felt that way. I remember having looked up at the sky like this in search of the eye of the typhoon. And then inside me, the axis of time gave one great heave. 40 long years collapsed like a dilapidated house, mixing old time and new time together in a single swirling mass. All sounds faded and the light around me shuddered. I lost my balance and fell into the waves. My heart throbbed at the back of my throat and my arms and legs lost all sensation. I lay that way for a long time, face in the water, unable to stand, but I was not afraid. No, not at all. There was no longer anything for me to fear. Those days were gone. I stopped having my terrible nightmares. I no longer wake up screaming in the middle of the night, and I'm trying now to start life over again. No, I know it's probably too late to start again. I may not have much time left to live, but even if it comes too late, I'm grateful that in the end, I was able to attain a kind of salvation, to effect some sort of recovery. Yes, grateful. I could have come to the end of my life unsaved, still screaming in the dark, afraid. The seventh man fell silent and turned his gaze upon each of the others. No one spoke or moved or even seemed to breathe. All were waiting for the rest of his story. Outside, the wind had fallen and nothing stirred. The seventh man brought his hand to his collar once again as if in search of words. They tell us that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. But I don't believe that, he said. Then a moment later he added, "Oh, the fear is there, all right. It comes to us in many different forms at different times and overwhelms us. But the most frightening thing we can do at such times is to turn our backs on it, to close our eyes. For then we take the most precious thing inside us and surrender it to something else. In my case, that something was the wave." So he says the most frightening thing we can do is turn our backs on fear, to close our eyes to it. If we do that, we take the most precious thing inside us and surrender it to something else. What do you think the seventh man was afraid of? I'm going to ask you this question in class next week. So what do you think the seventh man was afraid of? What kept him in such fear for 40 years? And notice that he changed and he released that fear he kept inside. He stopped getting the nightmares after he finally kind of faced the event, faced that fear. And he looked it straight in the eyes and he said, I'm not going to fear you anymore. He was hiding from the ocean, hiding from the memory of Kay, hiding from anything that reminded him of Kay. But it wasn't until he finally faced it that he got the relief that he needed. So don't forget that these questions on page 145, there are 5 questions. These are your quiz questions. So next week when we start class, just like always, you will have to answer these quiz questions. So if you answer them right now after reading the text and you write your answers in the book, then you will be able to do really well on the quiz. So please make sure to answer these comprehension check questions. Okay, I'll see you in class next week. I gotta stop my video. It's always awkward, me trying to stop my video. Okay, bye.